Let's flash forward about 250 years. We've now arrived on the American frontier. When Americans and immigrants began settling the western territory of North America during the 1800s, the vast majority of the settlers were men. The primary reasons for traveling out west were to look for gold, start farms and ranches, or to start a new life where space, resources, and freedoms were plentiful. Only a small number of men traveled west with wives or families. While there were single women on the new frontier, there were approximately 3 men for every woman. Some sources indicate the ratio was closer to 4 to 1. Single men soon found themselves lonely for female companions. Some chose to purchase companionship at local brothels, which we will cover in a future episode, while others began to think of creative ways to find a bride. At the same time in history, the Civil War had left a disproportionate number of single and widowed women back east. What these two populations had in common was loneliness. It was too risky for a man to leave his land in order to pursue a bride, for fear of it being claimed or taken over by someone else in his absence. Being unable to travel, some men wrote back home to ask friends and relatives to recommend single women they thought would make good wives. The pair would introduce themselves and get to know each other via correspondence. When a corresponding couple decided they were ready for marriage, the woman would travel west for the ceremony, and the pair would start their new life together. A much more common scenario was the mail-order marriage. Men living out west would advertise for wives in newspapers back east. In the advertisement, the prospective grooms would tell a little bit about themselves, what they were looking for in a potential wife, and how to contact them. Any interested woman who fit the ad's description would then write to the prospective groom. After these initial steps, the process was much the same as it was for men who met their wives through social networks back home. On rare occasions, a woman would advertise in Western newspapers looking for a husband. This was usually restricted to women who hadn't found anyone they were interested in marrying, or vice versa. The women who answered ads for mail-order brides were generally women who weren't having luck finding men, or men of quality, back east. Others simply wanted to get away from home. Some of those looking to get away had strict parents, were unable to overcome a sullied reputation, or were merely looking for a new adventure. Surprisingly, there were a large supply of women who answered the mail-order bride ads. Sources suggest that most of these marriages were relatively successful, assuming that both parties represented themselves accurately in their correspondence. I found several examples of clever entrepreneurs who attempted to make a business out of matching up lonely singles. In 1849, Eliza Farnham ran an advertisement calling for potential brides in New York papers. Over 200 women responded. You can only imagine the disappointment the California bachelors felt when Eliza arrived in San Francisco with only 3 brides in tow. While some of these businessmen and women were successful, singles seemed to have better luck pursuing their own marriage opportunities. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was also common for mail-order brides to come from overseas. The international version of mail-order brides during this time were known as picture brides. The name came from the common practice of potential spouses introducing themselves by exchanging photographs of themselves in the mail. The term picture bride originates from a Japanese phrase which literally means photo marriage. Between 1880 and 1923, Japan, Korea, Armenia, Italy, and Greece all sent picture brides to the United States. Influxes of picture brides often correlated with changes to U.S. immigration law or events happening in the bride's home country. For instance, during the Armenian genocide in the early 1900s, there were many newspaper articles documenting Armenian picture brides arriving in New York. The Japanese had been using the tradition of omiai, or matchmaking, since the 16th century. With the influx of Japanese laborers into the United States in the 1880s, the matchmaking tradition evolved to the arrangement of marriages based on pictures and family recommendations. As a result of this practice, over 10,000 Japanese women immigrated to the west coast of the U.S. between 1908 and 1920. Anti-Japanese nativism was growing in California due to the influx of Japanese immigrants as a part of the gold rush. In 1907, the U.S. and the Empire of Japan reached an informal agreement that the U.S. would not impose any formal restrictions on Japanese immigrants as long as Japan would not allow any further immigration to the United States. This became known as the Gentlemen's Agreement of 1907. The one exception to the agreement was for reuniting families. This created a loophole whereby Japanese women could immigrate to the United States by becoming wives to the Issei men already living in the country. In 1920, the Japanese government stopped issuing passports to picture brides. There is many a tale about what happened once the picture brides actually landed in America. Just as online dating profiles do not always give the most accurate representation of individuals today, such was the case with some Issei men. There are stories of poor bachelors borrowing suits or other lavish items from wealthy friends to take their picture with. Some men sent pictures of themselves from when they were much younger and more attractive. Just like the dating scene today, some men were afraid their brides would not come if they knew what they really looked like. Some men were years or even decades older than they claimed in their letters. Ai Miyazaki, who immigrated to the United States in 1916, recalls seeing the reactions of the picture brides as they met their fiancés. Quote, "None knew what their husbands were like except by the photos. The men would say that they had businesses and sent pictures which were taken when they were younger and deceived brides. In our own town in that era, the men all wore white clothes and dressed nicely in the summer. Here in America, the men usually had only a dingy black suit, worn-down shoes, and shaggy hair. To have seen someone like that as you came off the ship must have been a great disappointment. It was only natural to feel that way." Unquote. In addition to the shock of meeting their fiancés in person, picture brides also had to adjust to their new life in America. They adopted unfamiliar customs and ate strange new foods. Some faced back-breaking labor conditions along with their husbands. Some were so unsatisfied with their partners and their new life that they returned to Japan. Others chose to run away. However, the majority of picture brides stuck it out with their new husbands. Thanks to the influx of Japanese men during the gold rush and the influx of Japanese picture brides, by 1930, Little Tokyo and Los Angeles had grown to roughly 35,000 Issei and Nisei Japanese. Finally, let's take a look at the modern mail-order bride industry. The mail-order bride business is still thriving today. As of 2006, it was estimated that around 12,000 couples get together every year by means of the mail-order bride template. The internet has made it easier than ever for men to pursue wives from faraway lands. Instead of newspapers, mail-order brides now advertise their availability through international marriage agencies. What differentiates mail-order brides from other mate-seeking women, online or otherwise, is that their objective is to expand their pool of eligible mates by looking across international borders. According to Psychology Today, quote, "Most mail-order brides now come from Southeast Asia, especially Thailand and the Philippines, Latin America, often Colombia and Brazil, Russia, and the Ukraine. The prospective husbands they seek come primarily from the United States or Western Europe, although there is a market for foreign brides in South Korea and Japan as well." Unquote. As of the year 2000, the Philippines were exporting an estimated 20,000 women to foreign husbands on an annual basis. Modern mail-order brides come from all backgrounds and have a wide spectrum of reasons for pursuing a mate in this way. Some are middle-class women who are experiencing a shortage of eligible mates in their own country, while others are very poor women who are attempting to escape poverty. Potential mail order brides submit their photo and profile information to international agencies, which then publicize their availability. A few examples include rosebrides.com, russiancupid.com, and globalladies.com. It's shockingly easy for a budding entrepreneur to start an online mail order bride company. All they need to start is a few contacts with foreign women, access to a computer, basic knowledge of the internet, and money to advertise to Western men. Social and legal experts have strongly criticized the modern mail-order bride industry for its creation of immigration issues, exploitation of women, perpetuation of ethnic and gender-based stereotypes, and proneness to create environments for domestic violence. There are many cases where the line between mail-order brides and human trafficking are blurred. Trafficking of women includes, quote, any situation where women or girls cannot change the immediate condition of their existence, where regardless of how they got into those conditions, they cannot get out, and where they are subject to sexual violence and exploitation, unquote. Even though many women may enter the mail-order bride industry willingly, it puts them into a vulnerable state where they can be controlled or harmed by their agencies or their spouses. There are several laws regulating human trafficking, but many of them have not been interpreted to apply to the mail-order bride industry. This is mostly due to the perception that these transactions, or unions, are not possible without some level of consent from the bride or her family.